talked about adding or subtracting, finding the leading coefficient, and even multiplying and just keeping track of everything. So today we're going to learn about some things called, maybe, special products. They're called special products. Tell me, oh, no, we'll just go this way. In the parentheses, you have a binomial. Everybody agree? Two terms. Okay? V plus 4 quantity squared. When that squared is on the outside, remember, it really means there's two of those parentheses. You really have V plus 4 times V plus 4. Make sense? Put that squared on the outside. Now, last week, you guys learned how to multiply this. Tell me, walk me through how I would multiply V plus 4 times V plus 4. Say it again. 1V times 1V plus 1V times 4 plus 4 times 1V plus 4 times 4. 1V times 1V. 1V squared. 1V times 4 plus 4V. 4 times 1V plus 4V. 4 times 4 plus 16. Anything I can combine? Yeah, that middle term, those middle terms, right? So I end up with 1V squared plus 8V plus 16. Now, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we knew like a shortcut to not have to show all of this? And in one step, I could go from here, one step, answer. So let's look at our answer and look back at the beginning. What are some shortcuts that I think we could get from V plus 4 squared down to know my answer is 1V squared plus 8V plus 16? Thatcher?
Oh, you could make that because you're working square. You could just like take that square to 1.
Okay, so if I just took that first term V and squared it, everybody see what he's saying there? If I just took V and squared it, I would get 1V squared. Okay, so far so good. Meg? 4 squared would get me 16. How am I going to get this 8V? Say again? 4 times 2, right? We ended up with 2 of those 4 V's. Like if we multiplied V times 4 and then times 2, right? So that middle term, we had to take it 2 times the first times the second. See if this is right. Well, it is right. Let's do it over here. Okay? Thatcher told us to do what? Square the first one. What's our first term? So I'd have W, and I'm going to square it. Meg told us to square the second term. What's the second term? Be careful here. -5, and we're going to square it. Sophia said to get that middle term, we have to take two times the W, that first term, right? And times -5. What's W squared? W squared. What's 2 times W times -5? -10W. What's -5 squared? Positive or negative? Positive 25. You just wrote the shortcut. This works on binomials, 2 terms, that the whole parenthesis is squared. So let's write this as A plus B squared. We square the first one. You take 2 times the first times the second, and you square the second. Now, one thing I want to point out. We had a V plus 4. We ended up with a +8 and a +16. a W minus 5, I ended up with a negative 10 and a positive 25. What do you notice? Why is it always a positive on the end? You're right. When you square it, whether you square a positive or you square a negative, you end up with a positive number, right? The second term or that middle term is going to have the same sign as what your binomial did because that goes with your term. So if it's a positive in here, you know it's going to be a positive middle term. If it's a negative, you know it's going to be a negative. You always are going to have a positive at the end, though, because when you square it, you end up with a positive. Okay? So what if we got more intense terms? Does it still work? It does. Okay? A binomial, 2 terms, the whole thing is squared. First thing I do, 4y squared. How do you get that middle one? Two times 4y. Very good. I'm going to put a negative 1v there, but good job with your negative. Good. And then how do I get the last one? Negative 1v squared. Now be careful here. 4y squared. Good job. You got to square the 4 and the y squared, so you end up with 16y squared. 2 times 4y times negative 1v. Negative 8yv. Okay? Negative 1v squared. It'd be a positive, right? A negative times a negative would be a positive 1v squared. Try the one on the right on your own. 2v plus 7y squared. Square the first term. 2 times the first times the second. And then we square the second term. I should end up with 4v squared. 28vy plus what? 49y squared. Now here's what I'm going to tell you. It's very rare that Ms. Huff is like, use this shortcut, agreed? Usually I'm like, no, make sure you figure it out. Here's the deal. Some of you are looking at that going like, yeah, I got nothing. Could you still figure this out the other way? Could you just rewrite it like we did in the very beginning and multiply it, distribute like we have been? 110%. 110%. I would like you to try to learn this shortcut because it will help you in the second half of this chapter. But if you're like, I'm not consistently getting these correct, Ms. Hoff, it is not essential that you know this shortcut. Does that make sense? Okay? Flip it over. What's different about these binomials? There's not an exponent. The signs are different. So on the last one, the exponent of 2 made us have 2 binomials, but they have the same sign. Okay, let's go back old school from last week and distribute this. I would take 1z times 1z. And then I would take 1z times negative 7. And then I would take 7 times 1z. And then I would take 7 times negative 7. 1z times 1z, 1z squared. 1z times negative 7, negative 7z. Z times, or sorry, 7 times 1z, positive 7z. 7 times negative 7, negative 49. What happens? Those middle terms are opposite signs. They cancel. So your final answer is z squared minus 49. Okay, so what's my shortcut? You multiply the first terms, you multiply the second terms. Always a minus, sometimes a positive, sometimes a minus. Why is it always a negative? Back in the beginning, Ms. Huff said they're going to have opposite signs here. Well, no matter how many times you do it, a positive times a negative is always a negative. Okay, so d minus 6 times d plus 6. What's your first term? D. We need to square that, right? Always going to be a minus, and then we're going to take 6 and square it. This ends up being? Very good. D squared minus 36. Now, the negative sign is not inside that parenthesis. Some people like to write it as d times d minus 6 times 6. Just so they don't think about that squared and get confused on there, which is fine. So our shortcut here is a plus b times a minus b. We square a and we square b, but it's always a minus sign. It's always a minus sign. Notice how I don't have parentheses on this one? It's always that minus sign. So on the bottom left, what's my first term? 2z. I'm going to square it. I'm always subtracting. What's the second term? 1y, and we're going to square that. My final answer would be, careful, 4z squared minus 1y squared. Do the one on the right on your own. Your answer should be bingo. You know what the difficult part of today is? Paying attention to which shortcut to use, yes? Okay. 8-4, online, open and ready for you to do.